Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear. I know what you're saying. You guys have never seen me outside. Here I am. I'm at Bonnaroo Music Festival. It's a 4-day-long music festival in Manchester, Tennessee. It rained on us. It's been 100 degrees. I'm doing this as early as I can so I don't die while I'm out here. But I'm here to see music. But you guys know me. No matter where I'm at, I can't help myself but look for synthesizers. So I thought back and forth about the right format. But what I've settled on, I'm going to sit here and talk to you about the shows I saw, and I took phone footage of those, and we're just going to talk about the synths they used, why they're interesting, figure out what's common for professionals, things like that. And as much as I would love to record this all when I'm back home, I think this is way more fun. It makes it way more unique. So I was wrong. Filming on location fucking sucked, and I was spending time trying to get a good take instead of spending time with my friends. I was working instead of experiencing it, and I didn't like that. So instead, you've got me here in my basement. The same phone footage will be over here, but this way I've got more refined outlines, more insightful comments, and frankly, a much better attitude. Okay, so from Marc Rebillet to J. Cole and all the way back to Herbie Hancock, welcome to the first edition of Synth Spotters, covering Bonnaroo 2022. I'm going to go chronologically through all the shows I saw that had keyboards on stage that I think are worth talking about. I'll give a short bio on the artist, talk about the gear I saw on stage, then why I think those choices are interesting, and then right away to the next artist. You will see me manipulating my outline. It is too much for me to remember, and this is 12 pages. I'm not confident in the format at all, so I tried to write out as much as I could for every artist. I've had long-form conversational videos do pretty good before, so I figured why not, but I normally would never make a video with this much stuff written out. But this is something I care about. This is something I want to get right. It interests me, and I couldn't leave out any artists. You know, what if some artist you really, really care about played at Bonnaroo, I saw them, and I didn't mention them, even though I took good notes and wrote a good outline. So I think it's too valuable to waste for some people. Probably not myself. It's probably a bad idea to put a video like this that's this long, but I want feedback on the format. I don't know if it's funny for me to include festival experiences like I spent $16 on this mac and cheese and it was not good at all, or I wore a stupid outfit every day, or if there's value in covering other gear like guitars, whatever, any of those things, feedback on the format as a whole, feedback on what I cover. Okay, this is a pretty early iteration of what I want this content to be, so I'm just giving you everything. So any feedback is totally appreciated. Okay, these are performers that care about the music they're playing, and they want to put on a good show, and choosing a live rig is this delicate balance between really a lot of things, and a lot of these bands probably have brand obligations, but it's a balance between what works on stage, what can we bring with us no matter how far we're traveling, and what sounds right for the track or for the group. And different artists will have different priorities, and they'll end up on different points in that scale. But what's true for every group, no matter what, they chose that gear. That's with them on stage for a reason, and we can try and learn something from it. Of course, we don't know the full story. We can try and extract something. Okay, I'll do some pondering. How about that for the motivation for a lot of these choices? And I want you guys to ponder as well. I hope to see a lot of pondering in the comments. I hope this is of interest to you. It sure fascinates me. There will be chapters for each artist down below, and some choice Reverb affiliate links if you want to support me and are curious about the pricing of these specific units. Bonnaroo denied my press pass, so if you want to help reimburse me, I can't believe I'm asking this way, for the price of the tickets, I have merch, which I just happen to be wearing. It's pictures of my gear. Buy it if you want. If you don't want to do that, you can support me on Patreon. If you don't want to do that, you can subscribe. Okay, no more of that. It's all information from here on out, I promise. The first show I saw with keyboards on stage was a band called Bren Joy. I would describe Bren Joy as an R&B artist, and I believe Bren Joy is the name of the frontman, and I say R&B not in the this is the default genre for a black artist doing something other than hip-hop. I really mean R&B in the early 2000s way. It's down-tempo, smooth chords, slick lyrics, a focus on vocal performance, very, baby-making music. And I really enjoyed the energy. He had a great voice. He covered Redbone, and I thought the Redbone cover was really tastefully done. Anyway, we have one keyboard player with a couple boards on stage. The first, Yamaha Motif XS8. To me, this is a cool choice for a stage keyboard. It's workstation from mid-2000s. I don't know the specific year, but the sounds are, if I remember right, multi-layer samples, and the effects processing is early component-level modeling. And so, common opinion would say digital samples in 2007 weren't that good. It's before things are high enough fidelity to be irreputably good, and it's late enough that it doesn't feel crunchy or lo-fi. But if I wasn't the gear man that I am, there's no way I would know that this keyboard was 15 years old. And based just on the sounds, especially from the crowd, it wasn't lacking at all. It was used for a lot of what you'd expect an R&B group to use it for: Rhodes with chorus and phaser, classy piano sounds, and in my eyes, like, serious kudos for using a workstation from 2007 to play an R&B gig. That's what R&B sounds like to me, is that mid-2000s sampled instrument, workstation pianos. I think it's great. Very, very fitting, well chosen. There's one more keyboard on stage, something a lot of us synth guys are going to know. It's our first analog synth of the festival. Thank God it was the first show. It is a Sequential Circuits Prophet 6. If you don't know, the Prophet 6 was released in 2016. I think it's the sort of homage, update, modernization of the Prophet 5 architecture. The sound generation and available parameters are clearly based on the Prophet 5, but there's plenty of modern convenience and control available as well. We're going to see a lot of sequential stuff, and I think rightfully so. If you want good analog synth sounds from a reliable keyboard with straightforward controls, Sequential is totally going to deliver, and the Prophet 6 is kind of the middle-of-the-road right choice for that. So, again, kudos for that. I don't think there's much else to say. I thought the player was really, really good. Smooth chord voicings on the Prophet as well for pads, and I think at least twice for bass lines, and it sounded fucking great. So overall, Bren Joy was great. The vibes of being explicitly a throwback band, but songwriting in a show that totally felt modern. Okay, next up, we have Japanese Breakfast. To give a generally unhelpful genre label, I would say alternative or indie pop. Jubilee is their most recent album, which you should absolutely be listening to. I would call it really carefully produced, vocals that are generally subdued, and lyrics that feel narrative and thoughtful. You can hear plenty of subtractive synth sounds nestled neatly between guitars, keyboards, strings, and brass. And across the whole album, all those instruments at some point really have a time to shine. They give us a hook at some point. I only stopped with the show for a little bit because I had something else to see, and I plan on seeing Japanese Breakfast at a show much closer to my home turf in a few weeks, Des Moines' own 8035. But I was really pleased when I was there to see a lot of cool, exciting gear on stage. First, we had two analog polysynths, the Dave Smith Instruments / Oberheim OB6, which I recently shared my full thoughts on in a dedicated video if you're interested. But especially in this context, it's more or less the same impression as the Prophet 6. Highly reliable, super solid analog synth sounds, and a choice we can all, as synth folk, understand. And the other, which is a little more exciting, I love to see on stage a Korg Prologue 8. Korg's 2018 flagship analog poly. I had one for a little while. At this point, I really, really want to revisit it, but seeing it paired with the OB6 kind of validated where I see it fitting in. Classic analog synth sounds without much fuss. Both those keyboards covered a lot of ground. Like I said, I wasn't there for the whole show, but I heard pads and brass sounds from one or both of them. By the way, Korg, if you're still trying to sell those and you want a cheerleader, Jorb at jorblovesgear.com. Great. Okay, we also see our first vintage electric piano, a Wurlitzer 200 or 200A, which is personally exciting to me. I quite like mine, even though you see it being used as a shelf behind me. But in this angle, we see a very clear view of the front panel, and it has three knobs. The stock Wurlitzer 200 or 200A only has two. So the third one, we can assume the third one is there for vibrato rate, which is a pretty common modification to see. I think it's included in the drop-in amp replacements you can buy from Vintage Vibe, if I remember right. But exciting to me to see that on stage. There are tons and tons of modern, reliable ways to get Wurlitzer sounds on stage. But for this band, on this tour, somebody, I hope Michelle Zahner herself, said, you know what, the size and whatever reliability concerns don't matter because this is the right sound for me and this band and these songs. And I like that attitude. It's exciting for me, for this 50, 60-year-old thing to be on stage with professional performers. Super, super exciting. I'm going to stop harping on about how much I love electric pianos. A little less hype, but still cool to see. Opposite the Wurlitzer is a Nord keyboard. I never got eyes on the top panel, and the back was not visible, so I'm not sure which model specifically. I know there's a Nord States, there's Nord Piano, there's Nord Electro, and they all do their own thing in their own way, but they cover some of the same ground. And generally, when we see them on stage, it's going to be for piano sounds or electric piano sounds. And that was the case for this. I think it was acoustic piano sounds. But my impression of the Nords on stage, no matter what, is more or less going to be the same. Of course, they chose that. Nord has totally solidified themselves as the workhorse performer's choice for a modern stage keyboard. They're reliable, high-fidelity, feature-rich, flexible keyboards, and whether it's an electro, a piano, or a stage, or what iteration, what version of each really, it doesn't matter for this conversation. They're a solid, reliable choice, and they all kick ass. We're going to see so many Nords, so I'm going to keep a tally. It'll pop up every time there's another Nord, so we're at 1. Okay? One more thing. We can see Miss Zahner Michelle triggering vocal samples on what, to my eyes, is an SP404, maybe even a Mark II, based on another clip I looked at just to confirm. But we all know the SP404, classic, simple, sample-based music-making groovebox machine. I've seen a few used as on-stage samplers. One that really comes to mind is Terramellos. But every time I see one, it excites me. I know it's ubiquitous. I know almost any genre has a use for it, just playing samples, but I still get excited because I think it's such this standard, popular, normal, in my eyes, piece of gear to be reminded that these things are valuable for huge stage shows as well is just exciting. There may have been some other smaller synths on a little board with the player who had an OB6, but I never got eyes on them. Overall, a lot to ponder. The Wurlitzer seems so impractical, backed up against a Nord piano, but maybe the Nord's whirly sounds just didn't hit right, or maybe the only keyboard parts Michelle was playing for this set are Wurlitzer sounds. So why not bring the real thing and have the quote-unquote highest fidelity way of recreating those sounds on stage? So in my eyes, very well done for Japanese Breakfast. Okay, at this point in the schedule, it was Friday, and I wanted to see The War on Drugs and Bleachers, and maybe Still Woozy, but some friends of mine run a podcast about Bonnaroo and Ham's the Beer, my favorite, and they did a little pop-punk DJ set thing, and I filmed it for them. So I would have liked to see those shows, but homies take priority, and they did a fun little highlight reel with the footage I gave them. If you guys want to check that out, or their podcast, I'll link them below. Anyway, on the way back to the stages from like a quarter mile away, I saw J. Cole. A quick stop because I was headed for another show, but he had a full band, a drummer, 2 keyboard players, guitar, bass, backup singers, a full lineup. I love when hip-hop acts do that. They don't have to, and nobody would say something was missing if they didn't bring a full band. So I love it when they do. I love it when they take the time to prepare like that. But I was super far away. I could barely see, but I saw the red back of Roland Fantom. I couldn't tell if it was a 7 or an 8. And then another keyboard player, I noticed a Yamaha Montage 7 and an 8 stacked on top of each other. So a bunch of workstations, which makes sense for a hip-hop act, right? You need to be able to either use the exact same samples you did on the recording or have access to enough flexible, high-fidelity instruments to have performers play those live. Makes perfect sense. And why they picked the Yamaha versus the Fantom for one act or another, why they used 2 different montages. I'm assuming that keyboard player was playing 2 parts at a time, and the easiest thing to do instead of setting up a splitter or layer was just bring another keyboard. So decisions that all make sense and decisions I'm happy to see. And generally, J. Cole is an artist that deserves respect, and this stage setup for a live show where he did not have to do it that way makes for a great show. So again, well done. But my stop at J. Cole was quick because I was on my way to see King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I think they're impossible to assign a genre to. Every one of their 20 studio albums back to 2010 or 2012 feels totally different. First off, they had a fucking flute. I think his name's Stu. He played a fucking flute. That was amazing. And as the show went on, it was high energy, lots of, like rock and roll riffs on high gain guitars. But before I get lost in that, what are we here for? Keyboards. My notes now, 3 keyboard players on stage. First, near the front of the stage, manned by the harmonica player. Again, what a cool thing to have live. We have a Nord, and I saw the label on this one, an Electro 5. Another tally for Nord, and another keyboard player in the back, which had a keyboard that was blacked out, and I couldn't tell what it was there from the crowd, but I looked up another video. Guess what? Another Nord. One more. I don't know what specific model, but again, you've heard my impressions. But that keyboard player in the back, it was all above a platform or a pedal board or a mixed small box setup, we'll say. And I could see him playing something down there, and I got a glimpse of what I knew was a Keystep on the screen at some point, but I had to look it up later to see what the keyboard was. I see a Strymon Blue Sky and maybe a Boss Looper, one of the compact pedal format ones, and what I think is a Roland Boutique JP08, the digital 4-voice recreation of the Jupiter 8. That unit specifically, a lot of us forum keyboard warriors might scoff at. and one of the boutiques that, honestly, I don't see myself having much of a use for or any interest in, but it's clearly the right fit for whatever King Gizzard was doing for this player, for this tour, for this show, and I love it to see something so unassuming or something I would dismiss on a big-time stage like this. Great, exciting, and the final keyboard player who's in the front, he had a Keystep, which we could see from the crowd, and I could tell it was a Eurorack case, but I couldn't see what the modules were. And what I heard was simple monophonic lines. And yes, I went looking for another video to see what was in the case, and I wrote down everything I saw. I saw mutable plaits and mutable ripples, noise engineering module that I think is BIA, Basimilus Territas Alter, quadrax, maths, Pam's New Workout, Turing Machine, hexmix, disting, maybe an MCO, maybe a mimeophone. I'm more willing to say that was a mimeophone than I am to say that is an MCO. But I heard mono sounds through a reverb. And so that could be, at its core, without considering any modulation or envelopes or anything, be the MCO or plaits through the mutable filter, ripples, and then the mimeophone for like space, delay, and reverb. I don't want to speculate on the patch, especially any more than that, or any bits that I missed. But the rig was for simple mono parts and an arpeggio, which I can assume was driven by the Keystep. To me, using a Eurorack case live is dope and not really practical at all. That could have just as easily been a Micro Brute or a Base Station 2 or whatever. It's so easy in a Eurorack rig with a bunch of cables to have a single thing in the wrong spot or a single knob knocked just out of configuration and your whole sound doesn't work anymore. But again, King Gizzard, and maybe that player specifically, decided it was the right move for the right sound for this gig. And I love it. I love that this could be anybody's Eurorack setup. If I saw this picture of a 6U rack on, Reddit or Twitter or anything, I would just say, cool. That's all the stuff people recommended 4 years ago. Nothing about it is particularly special or extravagant, and I find it super, super exciting that the pros are using the exact same gear as us again. Anyway, moving on. One of the coolest things Bonnaroo does every year is a super jam. The idea is a bunch of artists from other groups that are playing that year cycle on and off stage and play a bunch of songs. It's great. This year was hosted by Jack Antonoff, Bleacher's frontman, decorated producer, and definite student of the School of Hooks. Plus, there was a theme. It was Jack Antonoff's 1984. It was only tracks from 1984, which pretty cool, right? Already walking in, I'm excited, and I had the thought that I might see some cool gear on stage, but imagine my heart aflutter when I saw on stage not one, not two, but three Juno 106s on stage. Do you guys know when the Juno 106 was released? Of course you do, 1984. Not only does seeing a bunch of Junos on stage make my gear man heart flutter, but it's perfectly in line with the theme. Even more points there. And yes, the show started really late, 30 or 45 minutes late, so we didn't get to stay for as much as we wanted to. But the first track they played was Van Halen's Jump, and the Juno did a fine job of ripping that iconic synth part, even though we know the original was on an Oberheim. It did a great job. And the Junos did, the Juno thing for the rest of the songs we heard. They played Madonna, and they played Take On Me, and the Juno fits perfectly for those songs in that era. There was also a Korg M1 on stage, which is but the Korg M1 is maybe 5 years too early for this. But as like a stage piano, if you want something that vibes kind of hard and to have an old school feel, great. It's classic digital synthesis. I think early virtual analog on top of PCM samples or individual waveform samples. An old school vibe heavy choice. I think it's great. I don't actually remember any parts being played on the M1, but there were piano parts that I saw on, you guessed it, another Nord. So, like I said, Super Jam started way late, so we left a little bit early to go to another show, Chvrches. But I think Chvrches is a perfect fit to hit some of my conclusions, so I'm going to save them for the very, very end. Next, a show I might not have gone to on my own or in isolation, but when you're at a festival with so many options, might as well see some stuff you might not have seen otherwise, right? This was Porter Robinson, an EDM artist with a subgenre or style some of my friends have called wholesome, and I think I have to agree. Compared to the other EDM shows I caught portions of, there was more of a performance element to Porter Robinson, and his music in general felt more sincere and respectfully less derivative. He played a piano and a few other keyboards on stage, but it was dark. I could not see them at all from where I was. The only piece of kit I recognized, and the only reason I'm bringing this up, it was a McMillon MIDI controller. I can't remember the names, Q something, but he had it strapped like a power glove to a wrist brace. and he had this part of the show where he started playing the riff to one of his most popular tracks, hitting one pad at a time to hit a single note. And people knew it. The first time he hit a single pad, people knew the track they were about to hear. And the McMillon was chosen, I can only assume, specifically to show up well on stage, from up in the front rows or even, on a screen when you're 100 yards back. When he holds this thing up, it's almost like somebody's pencil drawing of a MIDI controller. It lights up when he hits a pad. It's super clear to see what he's doing. You can understand that he's performing that in front of you right now. It made for a really engaging stage element. And that's probably a big part of why that MIDI controller was chosen, because it's a good visual element for that part in the show where he needed a good visual element. I say, well chosen. Okay, another left turn, Marc Rebillet, and I wrote this down, perpetually horny internet favorite, known for streaming raunchy, comedic, live loop performances all across the web. His weapons of choice are virtual instruments, live auxiliary percussion, his own voice, all looped together with the Boss RC505. I wasn't sure if his style or his format, I guess, would translate that well to a live show, but Marc did a good job of keeping it engaging and proved in earnest that he can work a crowd. But again, another cool thing to talk about, his stage up is, to my eyes, pretty much the exact same thing we've seen from him the whole time he's had any notoriety. It was an M Audio MIDI controller, I think a Code 61 into a Mac laptop. I don't know if it's a MacBook Pro or whatever. And unless he's changed in the last few years, he did a rundown of what he was using 3 or 4 years ago. And he uses Logic and MainStage. Through MainStage, which is like a way to just pick instruments and play them without any other fuss, without anything on top of it. One at a time, a drum kit or a Rhodes sound or an organ sound or a piano sound or a bass sound or whatever. And then that comes out of the laptop and gets looped through the RC505 along with a microphone, bringing his voice in. And if you don't know the RC505 is Boss's sort of top-of-the-line looper. It came out, I think, like 10 years ago, and we've seen it show up in all genres, musicians of all levels. It was one of the other things Boss did a Mark II of. They released a Mark II, I think that was just this year. And I can't tell from the crowd if Mr. Rebillet was using a Mark I or a Mark II. But regardless, there's 5 channels that you can loop and overdub with built-in effects and a lot of hands-on performance controls. One last thing, I know he's used the input effects for his microphone, for his vocals, but I also saw a Zoom multi-effect, and I had to look it up after I got home, but I think it is the V6 vocal processor. And he pitched his voice up and down a few times during the set. I don't know if that was the 505's input effects or the V6, could have been either, but just to make sure you guys know I saw it. But this was a fun setup to see at a festival like this. This is more or less exactly what he used in his bedroom to make videos that people found entertaining, to find his audience and gain enough traction to play at Bonnaroo. And the only difference now, there's a few thousand people live. Instead of seeing him online, during a stream or in a video later, there's a few thousand people live watching him. So to recognize on some level that what you were doing is what was working, why not just bring that? Why change it to some different sort of a live show? Shows a level of humility and respect for the fans. And I really, really like that. When, he just as easily could have made it a live show that was different from what he'd been doing, but he didn't need to. And what his fans liked is exactly what he gave them. So well done, Mr. Rebillet. Hopefully we're moving fast. Lettuce. Lettuce is a funk band. As funky of a funk band as a funk band could be. And in reflection of that, this is, to me, the most complete street cred earning keyboard setup that maybe I've ever seen, but certainly of this festival. The keyboard player's name is Nigel Hall, and he sat in the center of a shockingly complete keyboard collection. He's got to be a gearhead by my eyeballs. We have an actual organ, I believe a B3, but I'm not an expert, along with an actual Leslie rotating speaker behind him. So cool, super impractical, and the organ is so intrinsically tied to gospel music and then soul and then funk. To see a real one on stage, really, really exciting for me. On top of that, an actual clavinet. If you don't know, the clavinet's kind of the funkiest keyboard there ever was. It generates its sound with a bunch of guitar-like strings, or maybe up to the size of a bass. It kind of sounds like slap bass, or at least has some timbral similarities to a slap bass. You have heard it, even if you don't know you've heard it, the intro to Stevie Wonder's Superstition. Anyway, another vintage keyboard. Excited to see it. But moving on, we have a Rhodes Mark I. You guys know I love electric pianos, and this is the heaviest way to get good Rhodes sounds. But it's also serving as a stand for 2 analog synthesizers, a Minimoog Voyager. I can't tell which specific version it is, but I can tell from the back that it's a Voyager, and an Arp Odyssey, which I believe is a Korg reissue, but could very well be vintage. But these are 2 early monophonic synthesizers, and thanks to players like Herbie Hancock, no spoilers, because we'll talk about his setup later, they're inseparable from modern funk. The back cover of Herbie Hancock's album Sunlight is a top-down picture of all his gear on stage, and I know for a fact, because I've stared at it for so long, there is an Arp Odyssey right next to a Minimoog. I don't actually remember which parts were played on each of those. I didn't really keep track of it either, but some lead stuff, some bass stuff. Oh, and on the left side of his whole rig, there was another Nord. This is the sort of setup you'd see in a really nice studio, an old school studio. Not the sort of thing you expect to see gracing the stage at a festival. You know, any one of these could be the most important piece in somebody's collection or in somebody's studio, and he had all of them on stage, and he played all of them. Does being more authentic, quote unquote, make it a better show? No, but it gives me another dimension to be excited about it. And I really, really appreciated that. So, lettuce forever. Actually doing my research to see if I could find out if this was a reissue Arp Odyssey or an original, and I still can't really tell. I found a photo of Mr. Nigel Hall playing with an Akai Timberwolf, or Tamberwolf. I don't know if this is a joke or he actually thinks it's really, really good, but just there you go. Nigel Hall plays the Timberwolf. Still moving fast. Herbie Hancock. The only reason I really bought a ticket to Bonnaroo this year. He is a legendary keyboard player, a jazz innovator, a synth innovator. He played with Miles Davis early in his career, and somehow he managed to get better after that. The show covered a lot of eras of his career, and the rest of the band was really, really flexible in service of that. A trumpet player playing through a vocal processor, which was awesome. A guitarist with a lot of pedals, which was awesome. But we're here for keyboards, right? So Herbie's setup, pretty simple. He went between 3 keyboards. First and most obvious, a grand piano or concert grand. I don't know the difference, from a company called Fazioli. I hadn't heard of them, so I looked them up after being home here, and they learned they've only been around since the 80s, which to me seems like a short amount of time for piano manufacturers, but apparently they make some nice-ass pianos. And I quote from their website, Fazioli refuses any industrial approach to manufacturing and pursues the objective of uncompromised quality. So, handmade, super, super nice pianos. Herbie is mentioned on their website, cited way back in 2003. So presumably he's been happy with these pianos for nigh on 20 years. And presumably this was something he had specifically brought with the rest of the touring rig, or they found one in Nashville to put on stage for him, which is crazy and shows a really, really strong brand loyalty. But moving on, a Korg Kronos for Herbie, and one on the other side of the stage that I think was the trumpet player or maybe the bass player played for a little bit. But the Kronos is Korg's big brain do-it-all workstation. It has a bunch of different sound generation techniques, samples, I think physical modeling, a synth engine based on the Poly 6, tons of stuff, really all sorts of stuff. I have a good buddy who loves his Kronos, Will. I hope you're all right. But Herbie used his to play e-piano sounds, some synth sounds, clavinet parts, and even some vocoder passages. I know. How cool. And choosing the Kronos is sort of what I would expect, especially in hindsight, from somebody with a nearly 60-year track record of being open to new technology. Of course, he would take modern, hyper-convenient workstations and make them fit in his live rig. Plus, needing access to as many different sounds as he did, a workstation makes perfect sense to just click to the next one and go through a whole set. Plus, something I spotted on stage right away, but only came out for the very, very end of his performance, a keytar that I recognized, luckily, as one of the only keytars I am familiar with, and one of the only ones I think is in modern production anymore, the Roland AX Edge. I first played one at NAMM in 2019, and I remember being impressed with it. It was ergonomic in a way I didn't expect it to be. The performance controls felt good in a way I didn't expect them to be. Herbie Hancock used it to play Chameleon, and I have no reason to believe it wasn't the internal sounds. There's a chance it was MIDI out to the Kronos or something else, but we all know they use the Zencore engine, and for a simple synth part, guess what? It sounded great. It was a really cool moment to see Herbie Hancock, but seeing Herbie Hancock, hold that thing and rip that riff and bop across stage was kind of unbelievable to me. He's so next level transcendently important to music, and to have a recording career that goes back 6 decades, 60 fucking years, I play his tracks in my DJ sets. I've broken bass strings playing along the Chameleon, and here he is 30 feet away, ripping a gig. So cool. That's part of the magic of Bonnaroo and festivals like this. I can see Herbie Hancock and dozens of other artists that are important to me. And it's this like almost unbeatable density of experience that, even if that was one of whatever 15 shows I caught, that one was so important to me. That one was so special. It was great. So the quick lightning round review. So yes, Herbie Hancock's live rig, Kronos, grand piano, Roland AX Edge. And the AX Edge, I guess, was more of a prop than anything. But what is a keytar if not an instrument to be picked up and bopped around with? So Herbie Hancock, what am I going to say other than well done? Okay, I skipped one earlier, Chvrches. We left the Super Jam early to get to Chvrches, and when we rolled in, at first I was kind of disappointed. All I saw on stage, drum kit, microphone for Lauren, and 2 MIDI controllers. I believe they were Arturia Keylab 61s. I don't know if they were Mark II. They had tape over the branding, but I could recognize the side panels, and I saw the very recognizable, to me, Arturia knobs on the right side. Anyway, I was hoping for like a big synth rig, a complete synth rig, but nope, just 2 MIDI controllers. And what looked to be a drum pad, but we'll talk about that later too. And as the show went on, guess how quickly I didn't care. There was no shortage of great synth sounds. Martin and Ian, I believe are their names, they played the same keyboard controllers through the whole set. Both of them played guitar and bass, swapping in between tracks, but the same controllers. And they were playing different synth sounds, of course, throughout every track. And I think probably multiple times different sounds within each track. And so I'm thinking, okay, how are they doing this? Either this is some, sequence to the 9, super precise whole set, right? Where the set running in Ableton is automatically program changing or redirecting that MIDI when it needs to go somewhere else. Ableton is a guess, but probably Ableton. And those sounds are changing, on some pre-planned order at pre-planned times. Or maybe they're hitting a button for a program change that takes them to the next sound. And they just know at the end of every sound or at the part that they need to change the sound, they just click over to the next one. And whichever of those, it doesn't really matter. But either way, it probably means there was a lot more planning and a lot more rehearsal and a lot more thought behind how do we make this stage setup work for us because this is right for the tour or for the show or for the gig. To get all the sounds we need from these controllers, however they did that, they figured it out. So is that in part motivated by let's have less points of failure without bundles of analog gear on stage? Sure, but that doesn't mean the show's going to suffer. It just means they have less things to check when they come on stage. And less things to check when they come on stage does not mean a less professional, a less impressive, a less organized set, right? All it means is, for them, this was the right way to run a kick-ass show. They needed a live drummer, they needed Lauren's wonderful voice, guitars and keyboards, a pair of MIDI keyboards, and a shitload of coordination, and a shitload of planning. And it was a great show because of that. I have no idea what those MIDI controllers were controlling. That's disappointing, probably just to me. Maybe a few other gearheads, but when I'm jumping around the crowd singing songs with my friends, I don't give a shit. And it doesn't mean that they don't care about their gear. It means that the answer to what's the right thing for us to use is just different than something that's visual for me or, visually impressive like some of the hardware rigs I saw in other parts of the show. I'm sure you guys know what I'm saying. Chvrches' answer to what is the right way for us to do this was a bunch of pre-planning and 2 MIDI controllers. And it turned out really, really good. And another point I land on in the last thing, I saw, I believe Martin is his name, using some pad controller to do finger drumming and trigger like vocal chops and stuff. And I couldn't tell what it was. And eventually we got like the wire camera at the right angle and I could just barely see it was an MPC Live, just like what I use all the time here in my basement to make music or demonstrate stuff for you guys. At this highly professional, highly produced, highly organized show where professional musicians are entertaining thousands of people, that's the exact same piece of kit that I mess around with here in my basement and for you guys on YouTube. And it made me realize that what a special hobby I've got and we've all got, where in many ways we can work with the same equipment as those at the absolute top of the industry can. And gear is not everything. Of course it's not even close, but I love it. And I imagine so do almost all the performers I saw over the course of these 4 days. And because of that, we think about our choices and we make decisions as to what's right for us to play with and purchase and use and become attached to and all those things. And everybody's perspective results in a different choice. And I think that's exciting. Not everybody said, you know what, the Juno 106 is right for us. Not everybody said we're just going to use MIDI controllers. Not everybody said analog gear is the best. We have so many options as modern musicians, especially with, I joked about it before, but it is true. Backwards compatibility for instruments is just making noise. You can get that into whatever audio system if it makes noise, especially if it sends out on quarter-inch jacks without any trouble. So we can choose anything from music history, and how truly we saw that exemplified just in these 4 days at Bonnaroo, from organs to electric pianos to analog synthesizers to digital workstations and samplers. I got to see 60 or 70 years of musical instrument history on stage in front of me, being used for the same purpose, to play music on stage and entertain people. And I think that's amazing to get a glimpse of what professionals use and see how similar it is, and see, you know, the reverence for the same stuff that I have reverence for. I'm really left thinking, what a special hobby, what a special industry we find ourselves enjoying, and how wonderful it can be that this can be a career for people. It reminds me truly that I really love gear. So there you go. This is probably super, super long. It might bomb. I know someone's going to really appreciate it. I know someone just wanted to know every keyboard on stage for Lettuce, and I hope that I've helped them figure something out. I love talking about this stuff. Comment on any part of this if you are so inclined. My name's Jorb. I love gear. Thanks for watching. More synth spotting soon, I promise, hopefully with amendments based on what you guys tell me after this video. So I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers and so long.